So to begin, as you all know, for a good death to be accessible to more patients in the UK, as well as focusing on health and social care, there needs to be a societal change in our attitudes towards death and dying. Palliative care research is underfunded and has challenges due to the potentially vulnerable population. We embarked on this research with Demos because it uses innovative, unobtrusive research methods and focuses on the dying themselves, those who care for the dying, and the bereaved. The situation described gave rise to 3 clear needs. So the first being to investigate the ways in which internet users are taking to public platforms to discuss dying. Where are these discussions taking place? What is the nature and content of the conversations? What specific kinds of help are people seeking? Information, advice, solidarity, catharsis, consolation, hope. Also to develop our training, resources, and the public engagement of the centre in the light of the findings. And thirdly, to improve practice and public policy as a whole through a much greater evidence-based understanding of what those in the last stages of life, those caring for them, need, and how they are attempting to express those needs virtually. This project was particularly timely because the COVID-19 pandemic saw a significant shift to online support and tools, and we saw that with the presentation from Sue Reiner today. And a significant number of people have been bereaved and unable to grieve in a traditional way through attendance of funerals. We don't truly understand the impact of this on our society yet. While some people take easily to online platforms, others cannot access them with the same ease, and we need to understand inequalities and barriers in this. Similarly, there are many more people bereaved than there are grief counsellors. So understanding how online tools can work well in the aftermath of COVID-19 is important.
Thanks so much, Maggie, and thank you so much for the invitation to speak to you all today. My name is Ellen, and I run the digital research team called CASM, the Centre of the Analysis of Social Media at the think tank Demos. So we were really excited to work on this project because at CASM, our work is all about how can we understand online spaces, how can we understand the reality of online spaces and listen to people in online spaces, how they're really using them. We see a lot of sort of caricatures of, social media is just one big evil place full of disinformation. And we wanted to kind of look a bit beyond that and see how spaces are being used by people in these really difficult times and to deal with, very difficult situations. So I'm just going to take you through our methods where we looked online and our key findings, prompt a few questions about what we think this means for policy and improving care around the end of life. So this is a broad overview. So we looked at 7 different online forums, and we're keeping the names of those forums private for privacy reasons, those whose data we were looking at. But they included kind of big social media sites, but also smaller community forums, ones which were specialized on, focused on supporting people with particular illnesses or supporting people through bereavement. So it's a real mix of kind of the sorts of sites that we were looking at. And we collected over 110,000 posts from these sites. And the span, we collected this in 2020, as Maggie says. So we covered a little bit of the period of the pandemic, but also spanning back as far as some of the earliest posts were from, I think, early 2000s. So it's a kind of pre and during COVID analysis. And we applied a sort of series of different methods that we have and some different technologies to analyze what themes we were seeing coming out of the data and the ways that people were talking about these issues. And that included using kind of unsupervised machine learning, clustering data, using classic filters to look for particular words in particular conversations we knew would be of interest, and also training natural language processing classifiers to be able to sort the conversations into different areas. And these are the kind of 5 key categories of conversation that we found and that we thought were of particular relevance to this discussion. So the 3 main ones were care, and by that, I mean, there's discussions about people's experiences of care, people's experiences of caring for others, people's experiences dealing with care services, positive and negative experiences. We found a lot of kind of what we termed existential discussion, and this was really around kind of what happens after we die, discussions about different religious beliefs, different philosophical beliefs, around what is the nature of meaning and what is the point of life. And then we also found a lot of discussion, as you would expect, of grief and people's experiences of grief, ranging from people who've been very recently bereaved, or people who were very likely about to be bereaved, through to people who've been bereaved many years ago, but felt that they were still really struggling with grief and needed a space to express that they maybe didn't find elsewhere. And then the 2 other slightly less perhaps expected categories that we found coming out through the conversations. One was around the role of animals and pets both in grief, in that we found a lot of people talking about their grief over the loss of pets and over the loss of this source of comfort in their lives, but also the role of pets in supporting them through difficult times if they were bereaved or struggling with care difficulties and so on. And then online forums, we found discussion about kind of the nature of the online forum itself and how people felt about the space they were in. So the 3 kind of main reasons we found that people are using these online spaces at times of illness or times of bereavement, really seeking comfort, capability, and community. And for comfort, we found that people were using these spaces sometimes because they didn't have anywhere else to go, they didn't have anyone else to talk to, and they found that this was a space where they could just express themselves non-judgmentally. Other people would be there for them, didn't really matter what time of day or night. They'd be able to find advice from other people on how to cope and how to, comfort themselves as well. And there was a lot of discussion about people finding comfort just in the fact that there were other people who had similar experiences to themselves and who were going through a similar thing. So that in itself was a real source of comfort. So we've got a few quotes. These are edited to protect privacy, but these are the sorts of sentiments that we were seeing being expressed, that people really felt these online spaces were a really kind of important and emotional resource for them, not just sort of something they log on to once or twice, but really something they come back to provide comfort. In terms of capability, we saw a lot of sharing of knowledge, and some of this was very practical. It could be around medical advice, medical treatment, or advice about how to navigate various systems, as NHS systems, advice on and sorts of where to go for help, all these sorts of things. But it was also a place where people were discussing how they felt often quite powerless in situations where perhaps they were dealing with health and care services and felt like they weren't being listened to, felt like they couldn't get in touch with people, they didn't know who to turn to. So the spaces, the online spaces sort of had a dual purpose of providing some of that information, but also just providing a space for people to be able to say that they didn't have access to the help that they needed. And this is another quote from one of the forums. And then the third thing, one of the really, I think, most important ones as well, is people really seeking a sense of community. We found people sharing really very, very personal experiences, lots of detail, people talking about their lives in incredible amounts of detail. But also people talk, even in a forum which was maybe focused on bereavement or grief, for instance, people wouldn't only talk about bereavement or grief. They would be talking about what they got up to that day, or they would be talking about TV shows they'd seen, or whatever it might be. And a real sense of people coming back to the space over and over again, learning who other people were in the space. Maybe everybody was anonymous, but people would still recognize usernames and profiles and so forth, and kind of come back to the spaces again and again. And particularly, obviously, during the pandemic, there was discussion around how online had become a sort of option that was really necessary, and obviously some discussion of the way that Zoom funerals and things have become fairly normal. People saying how difficult they found that, but also that given the circumstances, it was a kind of welcome option that it was there. So again, someone saying that they felt that they could really express themselves in this online space in a way that they couldn't necessarily elsewhere. So what does this kind of mean for what have we learned from all of this, and what can we do with this? I think where we took this was together with Maggie and a lot of familiar faces in the room today. We held workshops with practitioners and experts to talk about what does this mean for practice, what does this mean for policy, and a few things really came out. And one was that these online spaces are a real resource that perhaps isn't being kind of acknowledged and understood necessarily in terms of the support that they can provide people, specifically that kind of peer-to-peer support, specifically that kind of shared experience, access to other people who may have advice for coping with similar situations. And that this presents a real opportunity for being able to help people better in those situations. But there were a lot of kind of caveats as well that came with that in our discussions around, as Maggie said, around the issues of inclusion and accessibility, around who's able to access these spaces. We only looked at English language forums, for instance, and the issue was raised that other forums for people speaking other languages might not be so well resourced or well publicized. And so what we really felt was that there was this gap between the sort of possibility of these online spaces and possibly the reality. We did see some discussion in the conversations we looked at, people feeling that the spaces were under-resourced or they weren't actually getting a response. They thought they would be, but the moderator was offline and they didn't know how to deal with that. So the way we sort of framed our recommendations, and we have a full suite in our report if you want to read those, but we're really about firstly kind of building the presence of these online spaces when we think about care and the end of life, in just kind of acknowledgement and awareness that they exist and they can be helpful for people. But then also kind of coupling that with being able to support access to these spaces more fully. So not just making people aware that they are there, but resourcing them better, providing more resources and training for instance, moderators who are engaged in these spaces, organizations which host these spaces, and being able to support also people accessing them in different points and different modes of interaction with healthcare services. And then improved practice really focuses on not only how can we be kind of incorporating the use of these spaces in supporting people, but also what can we learn from what people are saying in these spaces. We saw a lot of discussion about the healthcare service, about people's experience of care, about people's experience at the end of life. And this is kind of a huge untapped resource that kind of people's real experiences and people's real feelings about things that maybe isn't being utilized as much as it could be. And so I think also building on what we can learn from these spaces to try and improve the other systems that we have is really necessary. I think the kind of crucial thing is that this is never going to be a panacea. Online systems, online spaces are never going to be able to solve every problem, and they aren't right for everybody. And so it's really about how can we be having a more flexible and kind of tailored approach that recognizes here is an opportunity that might work for some people and might be helpful to some people, without that then just crowding out the need for other forms of support and the need for other forms of help. So thank you so much for listening. Yeah, we'd love to take any questions. Otherwise, I'll hand back to Maggie.
And I can't tell you how much of a joy it's been to work with Ellen and her team. It's the reminder we've spoken about multidisciplinary teams here today. To me, the world is about partnerships, and it is about hybrid. It's a new way of working, but we can't do it all on our own. It's just a joy to work with other people. But there's just a tiny little bit more, which is what it means to die well is an ongoing question, one which affects every one of us, but one which has become difficult, even taboo, and that's what we've discussed today to talk about. As many of you, I'm sure, know, in the 15th century, the Ars Moriendi, The Art of Dying, was published, a Christian tract including religious instruction and encouragement for a dying person, their family and companions. The omnipresence of death in the Middle Ages meant that it was a necessity for people to engage with the often very present question of what they wanted their death as well as their lives to be like. And so this is a new Ars Moriendi. Not quite the same, but it's the crowdsourced wisdom found online about the needs of people approaching the end of life. The first phase of this work, as you heard from Ellen, was therefore devoted to uncovering and understanding these needs as they were expressed or manifested in the use of internet and social media sites. I really do invite you to read the report in full, and as I shared, it's available on the Art of Dying Well website and the Demos website. And I know that Charles Blakes Trust are here today, and they very kindly part-funded this research, so it couldn't have happened without them. So thank you.